بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So today we are going to jump to the actual story of the assassination of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an, and we're going to have to split this up into two because we have quite a lot of details to cover. So last time I had mentioned the actual specific points that the critics had criticized Uthman radiallahu an. So today let's talk about the political circumstances. How exactly did the assassination and how exactly did the siege of the house of Uthman take place? I had already mentioned that the rabble rousing had increased and more demands were being sent by the various provinces, and in particular from the province of Egypt. And a group of Egyptians who were actually the troublemakers in that province, and they had had many clashes with their governor, decided to go in person to Uthman ibn Affan. And they announced that they would go do an umrah, and then after the umrah they would turn towards Medina and petition Uthman directly. And at the time their primary complaints were that the wealth should be distributed more fairly, meaning they should get a bigger share of the wealth, and that a number of their members, a number of the rabble rousers, they had been imprisoned, some of them had been exiled, one of them had even died after a beating. So they were going to complain about the governor, and they wanted the governor to be punished and to be removed. So in Rajab of 35 Hijrah, they left Egypt, and the news spread to the other provinces that a large delegation is leaving from Egypt to petition the caliph about their grievances. So other cities joined this caravan as well, and in particular Kufa. So the two main groups were from Egypt and Kufa, and there were smaller groups from other provinces as well, such as other cities as well, such as Basra and AsSham or Damascus, and the outlying regions. And also understand that, imagine if you will, all of these different people coming together and marching 3 weeks at least to get to Hijaz. They will rile themselves up. The mob mentality will increase as they're walking and marching and they're going to the caliph. You have to understand, this is a frenzied mob that's getting more and more angrier. They're telling each other their complaints and whatnot, and they make their way to perform the umrah, and then they turn towards Medina to petition Uthman. It so happened at the time that Uthman radiallahu anh was actually on an expedition. He wasn't in Medina, and when they heard of this, they diverted and went to the city that he was in, which is some distance from Medina, and they met Uthman radiallahu anh in this small village, if you like, which was at least, I think it's around 150 or something miles away from Medina. And they petitioned him with a number of complaints. By the way, the city's name is Dhil Marwa. Now, the details of the meeting in this city are very sketchy. We really have only just fragments of the meeting. But from what we learn is that they said to Uthman radiallahu anh, open up the Mus'haf. So he opened the Mus'haf, and they said, recite from the 7th surah, and they used to call Surah Yunus as-Sabi'ah. And so he recited Surah Yunus, and he got to verse 59. And verse 59 says that قُلْ اللَّهُ أَذِنَ لَكُمْ أَمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَفْتَرُونَ. Say, did Allah give you permission, or are you lying against Allah? They said, stop. Did Allah give you permission to make the hima, remember we talked about this last week, to make those lands sacred only for you and not for the rest of the Muslims? Did Allah give you permission to do X? Did Allah give you? So they went over some of those complaints. So they were wanting this ayah. The ayah is a reference to the pagans worshipping their false gods. And Allah says, where'd you get this from? Did Allah tell you to do it, or are you lying against Allah? So they took that half of the ayah and they said to Uthman, where did you get your policies from of wealth distribution, of taking this sanctuary in Medina? And we talked about some of those complaints last time. And before we even get to the response, subhanAllah, look at the sheer arrogance of these rabble rousers, that they automatically presumed that they are more knowledgeable of the Qur'an than all of the senior Sahaba. These new converts who have never met the Prophet ﷺ, they have never studied Islam, they have never formally trained in tafsir, they take half a verse and they think they can challenge all of the senior Sahaba. And the reality is that this type of simplistic fanaticism still plagues the ummah. This type of simplistic fanaticism. Oh, the Qur'an says X, coming from a person who has never studied anything. No fiqh, no tafsir, no hadith. He just takes half a verse and thinks that his policies are justified. As well, look at their arrogance in assuming, and this is an important point, so pay attention to this, that the Qur'an in and of itself lays out a detailed constitution of how to run a country. So even if Uthman radiallahu anh had so many policies, he doesn't need explicit verses in the Qur'an to talk about zoning. The Qur'an doesn't give you zoning laws. The Qur'an doesn't give you the details of how to manage a country. The Qur'an does not have a constitution. The reality, this simpleton presumes that the Qur'an has to tell Uthman that this land is demarcated for the state. And this type of, honestly, the naivety to assume, and frankly we have to say this, some of the groups to this day, they have these types of notions, that they believe that the Qur'an has these detailed canons of law. It's not. The Qur'an comes with generalities. And in every era, the Abbasids, the Umayyads, the Khulafa, the details of judgment are left to the rulers. How you're going to run the country, dividing it into provinces, demarcating funds for this or that. This is not in the Qur'an. And Allah Azza wa Jal did not reveal it because the Qur'an is not meant to be a detailed qanun for how to run a country. So the very premise that they're asking Uthman, where did you get the Quranic evidence to distribute wealth in this manner? He doesn't need Quranic evidence. The Qur'an says obey those in authority. That's all. So those in authority can judge what is the best maslahah for the ummah and what not. And also, we see over here the beginnings of what are going to become Kharijite Islam. Okay, now, Kharijite Islam, we will come to it when we talk about Ali radiallahu anh. I've given many khutbahs, you all are vaguely familiar with it because we always call the terrorist groups Kharijite. And we're going to explain what is Kharijism when we get to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Right now, there are no pure Kharijites. Right now, it's Uthman's time. Kharijism will officially be born after the battle between Muawiyah and Ali radiallahu anh. After that battle, the after effects of the battle is the official birth of the first sect of Islam that broke away from mainstream Sunnism, and that is Kharijite Islam. These people are 5 years before then. However, one of the tabi'een said, I saw, and this is an authentic narration in the Musannaf, I saw the majority of the killers of Uthman in the ranks of the Khawarij on the day of Ali. So this athar from one of the tabi'un is very explicit that the people who killed Uthman radiallahu an are going to become the kernel of Kharijism. These are the same groups and their same attitudes, and our Prophet ﷺ explicitly predicted them, explicitly gave us characteristics. حُدَثَاءُ الْأَسْنَانِ سُفَهَاءُ الْأَحْلَامِ. They are a bunch of young people with grandiose schemes. They speak a beautiful speech, but their actions are the worst of the creation. You listen to their rhetoric, and even an impious Muslim gets fired up. Even somebody who doesn't know the reality of this group will say, oh wow, what beautiful speech. But then you look at what they're doing. And the Prophet ﷺ said, their actions are the worst of the actions of humanity, and their speech is the best speech of humanity. So there's a big disconnect between statement and action. And we see this, of course, in Kharijism, very pure, and frankly, even in ISIS to this day, we see the exact same thing. That when they speak at times as if they're defending the ummah and this and that, but then you look at what they do, then la hawla wa quwwata illa billah, you are shocked to the core. How could any Muslim do this? And these characteristics are, of course, to this day. The killers of Uthman are they are the neophytes, the proto-Kharijites. They're going to become Kharijites. So we see this from now. They think they're quoting the Qur'an against Uthman Ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala an, the one who compiled the Qur'an, the one who read the Qur'an on average throughout his life once a week, and usually there are even times he read it in the entire night. Uthman ibn Affan was one of those who would regularly recite the Qur'an, regularly, every once in a while he recite the whole Qur'an every single night. So they gave their complaints against Uthman ibn Affan. Now, by the way, yesterday or last week I went over, was it 11 complaints, 11 criticisms. Realize, today we mentioned that those 11 were not given at one time. Rather, the political complaints were given right now. The personal complaints, what we would say in English, the ad hominem attacks against his character, these came later on when they're surrounding his house. Okay? So understand that when they meet Uthman for the first time, their complaints are about fiscal policies. Their complaints are about their governors. Their complaints are about how they have been mistreated, the economic distribution. So this is their complaints. And Uthman ibn Affan responded to each and every one of their criticisms by, in essence, agreeing to their demand. Okay, you want this? Okay, you want that? And he's trying to quell the fitna. And in the end, he said to them that, very well, each group amongst you, those from Kufa, those from Egypt, those from Basra, those from Damascus, you go ahead and tell me, who do you want as your governor? And I will remove your current governor and place the governor, obviously from the qualified Sahaba, obviously. I will place the governor any of your choice. Just go ahead and choose. So we notice here Uthman ibn Affan is willing to compromise everything as long as it is within the Sharia. And therefore, they demanded a number of things, and Uthman ibn Affan said, I will send Ali ibn Abi Talib and we will finalize the agreement. So Uthman returned back to Medina, and Uthman sent Ali along with the delegate of Sahaba to ratify, if you like, the peace treaty. Well, it wouldn't be a peace treaty, it would be basically a negotiation. It would be a means of quelling the fitna. By the way, notice, who did he choose? Ali ibn Abi Talib. How can anybody claim that there was tension between Ali and Uthman when he's choosing Ali to negotiate on his behalf? The one person that goes to negotiate is the senior most companion alive at the time after Uthman, and that is Ali ibn Abi Talib. And Ali willingly agrees. This is enough to dispel the myth of the non-Sunni group that Ali radiallahu anh secretly desired and plotted and planned. It is, as we from our perspective believe, completely a figment of their imagination. So Ali radiallahu anh goes to this group and they agree to a number of things. The details are mentioned in the books, but from our purposes, what's important is, number one, the phrasing that they had, wealth will be distributed more equally and justly. What do they mean by this condition? So they want a higher percentage. Okay? When they say more equally and more justly, so they want a higher percentage. Uthman gave it to him. Khalas, go ahead. Get your share. Be happy then. Stop this fitna mongering. Okay? Number two, they had a condition that various people from their ranks who had been exiled or had been banned, because again, realize these rabble-rousers are causing a lot of fitna back home. And their governors have dealt with them by exiling some of them from the provinces and by imprisoning, and yes, by beating some of them. As I said, one of them, as a result of some of these beatings, he fell sick in prison and he died. He wasn't executed, but you know how it goes, sometimes you just fall sick and whatever. So one of their leaders died. That was actually one of the main reasons why the Egyptians marched to Uthman ibn Affan to complain of their governor. So they the second point was these people that were exiled need to be brought back. And the third point was that we want to employ only trustworthy governors, and they had a list. So the people of Egypt said, get rid of, his name was Ibn Abi Sarh, get rid of him and bring our new governor. And they asked for Amr ibn al-As, the first governor under the time of Umar. So they wanted him back. So they got him back. And the people of Kufa, they demanded that another Sahabi had been appointed there, and they had a list of, and obviously all of these accusations really are exaggerated, and whatever problems they had. The fact of the matter is the people that were put in charge, and as you all understand, there's no politician who can please everybody. You cannot please everybody. The problem with these people was their complaints. They were the ones who went physical with their complaints. And the governors tried to quell them, and sometimes this led to imprisonment and whatnot. So the people of Kufa as well had their Sahabi removed, and they put Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. They said, we want Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. The people of Damascus, they loved their politician. Who was their governor? Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. And this shows us, by the way, that no matter what some of the other groups say about Muawiyah, for us he is radiallahu anhu, he is a Sahabi. Even though, as I said many times, a lot of times us Sunnis, we make a big mistake here. Muawiyah is not to the level of the senior Sahaba. Yes, he's Sahabi. We do not say anything negative about his niyyah, about his commitment to Islam. But number one, we don't have to agree with every ijtihad of every Sahabi. We have the right to disagree. We have the right to disagree with policy. And number two, you cannot compare Muawiyah to any of the Khulafa. Muawiyah is of the youngest of the Sahaba in terms of being with the Prophet. Yes, he has some honors, no doubt about it. But you cannot compare, he is of the people who accepted Islam at the very end, and that is of the conquest. Or those who converted on the day of the conquest. You cannot compare Muawiyah to the Ansar or the Muhajirun radiallahu anhu ajma'in. So we have to be fair. اعتق الذي حق حقه. And Muawiyah radiallahu anhu is of the lowest ranks of the Sahaba, but even that is way higher than any of us. So what we can see about Muawiyah for sure is that he is a capable leader. Even in the time of fitna, the people say, we're happy with Muawiyah, no need to change him. And this really, the fact of the matter is, the Umayyad clan, this was in their blood. The Umayyad clan, this was in their blood. They were the politicians in the days of Jahiliyyah, and after Islam they became the first dynasty. And Muawiyah exemplifies that at the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty. So there are other conditions, but for our purposes we'll keep it to these three, right? Number one, fiscal policy. Number two, personal issues about their leaders and whatnot. And number three, changing the governors. As of yet, no complaints against Uthman. That's going to come later on. So Ali radiallahu anh agrees on behalf of Uthman, and the agreement is done. The agreement is done, and the delegates agree to go back to their various cities. They're not in Medina right now. They're in this small village. Large groups of people have come. They're not in this village. Then the next morning, an incident occurs that is to change the course of history. What is that incident? They see a rider in the distance fleeing away from their camp. And something doesn't look right. It's fishy. In the morning, somebody is seeming to be fleeing away. And this rouses their suspicion. So they send a convoy to capture this person. And when they capture him, he confesses that he is the messenger of Uthman to the current Egyptian governor, not the one who's going to come, Ibn Abi Sarh, the old one, the one who they have all the complaints with, to the current Egyptian governor. So he is a secret messenger from Uthman to the current Egyptian governor. And they search him and they discover a letter, sealed letter, in which it says, when this delegation, the ones that they're reading the letter, returns back to Egypt, imprison them, or cut off their limbs, or crucify them, or kill them. Meaning, every one of them has to be punished, and you, O governor, decide the fate of each one. Killing, cutting off, crucifying, maiming, torture, every one of them that complained has to be dealt with. And they also found the seal of Uthman on the presence of this messenger. Okay? They found the khatam, the seal, that is used to sign as the sign, the token that Uthman radiallahu anh means business. And he's sending the seal to the governor that this is a real letter, because obviously the letter is a very big letter. It's a very meaning important letter. So this is my seal. Make sure you act upon this letter. Now, before we continue with the story and what happened with the people, we obviously need to pause here and talk about what and where and how. What is going on? Where is this letter from? And we have to try to analyze this mystery 14 and a half centuries later with very few pieces of evidence, right? Unfortunately, we don't have the letter with us. We don't have forensics to analyze it. We have to just analyze reports from the good old days. And there are three possibilities that have been proposed by various people across the Muslim groups. The first one, which we will immediately dismiss, is that the letter is authentic. Which group do you think believes this? The non-Sunni groups. Yes, very good. Very precise of you. The non-Sunni groups. Give a shout out to the note taker. I always diss you once in a while. I'll put you up. Don't worry. Alhamdulillah. The non-Sunni groups. They say the letter is authentic. Why do you think they say the letter is authentic? Because that's their position. That's their theological, that's their suits them, it's their agenda. They already have enough complaints about the khulafa, the first three, and this only adds more fuel to their fire, right? So from their perspective, it's clear. This is a letter from Uthman radiallahu anh, and he wanted to, and from their perspective, astaghfirullah, it is consistent with their version of Uthman's character. Clear? From their perspective, it is consistent with their understanding of Uthman's character. Now, for us, I mean, honestly, it's just ludicrous to even entertain the notion for many, many reasons. Where does one even begin? But most simply amongst this is that Uthman radiallahu an swore by Allah when he heard of this news and they surrounded his house that he had never seen this and he has no idea what this is. And he himself said, how many letters are fabricated in the names of others? He swore by Allah that it is simply not something that he had known. And also, I mean, even logically speaking, as we'll come to today and next week, when his house is surrounded and the Sahaba multiple times say, let us go and fight these people. What is his point? What does he say? We know this from, nobody's going to fight under my watch. No sword is going to be unsheathed against another Muslim in my Khilafah. That's why he stood there to the end until they killed him. Now, if Uthman wanted to kill them through the governor, why would he? And when his house is surrounded, and we'll get to the story in a lot of tragic detail next Wednesday, inshallah, they're depriving him of food and water. Even water is not going to his house. And still he refuses. In any legitimate understanding, Uthman could have defended himself, could have told the Sahaba, attack. So the notion that he forged this letter, then he refused to defend himself against these very people, it's ludicrous. Not to add to this, not to mention, of course, that his akhlaq that we understand from him, his haya, his softness, it goes against completely our version of Uthman radiallahu anh. And we don't need to, it's understood. He swore by Allah, his whole philosophy of dealing with this and his akhlaq goes against this completely. So it's clearly not from Uthman. Okay, and no Sunni says this, by the way, understood. This is one of those sectarian divides. No Sunni ever felt and claimed that this letter is from Uthman. It is honestly impossible for us to believe, any Sunni to believe this. Again, so many evidences. Okay, most Sunni medieval historians, they blamed the cousin of Uthman, the secretary of Uthman, what we would call the prime minister in our vernacular, the katib. And the katib is the main person who's basically, micromanaging. And that is none other than Marwan ibn al-Hakam. Marwan ibn al-Hakam. And this is a standard presumption amongst many, many historians. That's the default. And their main claim for this is that who else would have access to the khatam? And they say that Marwan's intentions in his own way were noble. Like he wasn't planning to get Uthman into trouble. He wanted to deal with the rebels, harshly get rid of them, and try to protect his cousin Uthman. Because overall, we know that Marwan was loyal to Uthman throughout his life. He was very loyal to him. And sometimes in overzealousness, what happens? You go beyond the necessary, right? So the claim is that Marwan ibn al-Hakam was sincerely, overzealously misguided. He didn't want to harm Uthman, obviously. And what happened was the letter was discovered and it backfired. And it eventually led to the death of Uthman. Now, agreed, this is the position of many Sunni medieval historians and even some modern ones. And I cannot deny that. There are people that have said this. However, there are many who debunk this theory as well. And they say this is also bizarre. Why? Why can't we ascribe the blame to Uthman? To Marwan. Number one, while Marwan ibn al-Hakam is not a Sahabi, he's also not just a Tabi'i. He's in a middle category. And we talked about this 2 weeks ago. He is of those who are called the Children Sahaba. And the Children Sahaba are those who saw the Prophet ﷺ just a glance. They didn't hear anything from him. They never studied or interacted with him. They simply, we assume, and that's another point, because we don't know for sure. But it is almost impossible as a 6-7-year-old, he didn't just glance upon the Prophet ﷺ during the conquest of Mecca and the week or two that he was in Mecca at the time. So Marwan was a little child when that occurred. Marwan was probably 6-7 years old when Mecca is conquered. 6, 7 or 8, one of these years. And so clearly, even though he's not a Sahabi, at the same time, he is in a category that we need to be very cautious. And generally speaking, the Muslims who even saw the Prophet ﷺ as young children, we assume them to have some type of Sahaba status. So from a theological perspective, Marwan cannot be compared to a person after that generation. Secondly, now Sunni historians, I don't need to tell you that there's huge ikhtilaf. You know how like the Shia look at the Umayyad dynasty overall. You know this, and not just Yazid. The whole Umayyad dynasty is viewed as being one of the worst in the entire history of the Ummah. Whereas for us, the Umayyad dynasty, despite its faults, we don't defend it like we defend the Sahaba. Despite its faults, it was the Umayyads who conquered the world for us. It was the Umayyads that Allah blessed to go ila mashariq al-ardi wa magharibiha. It was the Umayyads that throughout its 95 years, there was nothing but one conquest after another during that time. And Islam was in a state of izzah and glory. And they were the ones who really made Islam the civilization that it was. And they laid the foundations for the glory of the Abbasids. And the glory of the Abbasids could not have happened without the foundations of the Umayyads. So for us, Marwan, he occupies a status we have to be a little bit careful about. Secondly, we said that Marwan in particular, he is viewed by all Sunni historians, forget the non-Sunni groups for now, by all Sunni historians, he is viewed as a noble leader. And there is nothing but praise for him in our books. In fact, to add more credence to his status, Marwan is a narrator of hadith, not directly, meaning he's narrating from the Sahaba. He does not narrate any hadith of the Prophet ﷺ directly, but he narrates from the Sahaba. So his name is found in the 6 books. And most significantly, Imam al-Bukhari uses Marwan as a narrator. And for those of you who know anything about the sciences of hadith, when Imam al-Bukhari uses any person in his Sahih, this is the highest level of hadith narrator. So Marwan is a hadith narrator. And he narrates from the Sahaba, and his ahadith are found in Sahih al-Bukhari. And that is a huge deal. Additionally, historically speaking, Marwan is really, he's not the founder of the Umayyad dynasty, but he is the biological architect of the Umayyad dynasty. Because Muawiyah radiallahu an, he only had his son Yazid and then his grandson Muawiyah ibn Yazid ibn Muawiyah. So 2 people after him. Then his lineage ceased. There's no more from the line of Muawiyah. Right? So this is basic Umayyad history. After Muawiyah's death, Yazid. After Yazid's death, Muawiyah. Muawiyah for less than a year. Muawiyah was 21, 20, the young Muawiyah too. Young kid, young shab, and he was always sickly. He might have had some disease or something, and he died very young death. So the lineage comes to an end. So the Umayyad dynasty transfers. This is, of course, 35 years from now, when Marwan is in his late 70s. Right now, Marwan is in his 30s. When Marwan is in his 70s, then the Umayyad dynasty transfers over to him. And every single Khalifa of the actual Umayyad dynasty after Muawiyah is from Marwan. Even Marwan ruled for 1 year because he's very old, 78 or something. He was very old when he became Khalifa. He literally ruled for a year or two, and then after that he passed away. And then Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. And Abdul Malik was the one whose 4 sons, the only person in our entire history who had 4 sons, one after the other, as the Khalifa. That's Abdul Malik. And in the middle was a cousin of the sons, and that is Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, right? So that's 5 back to back. So, and this is the grandsons of, so Umar is also one of the grandsons. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is one of the grandsons of Marwan. So Marwan is the biological founder of the Umayyad dynasty, all of the Umayyad Khulafa, and then the Umayyads of Andalus. Because remember, when the Umayyads of the Khilafah stopped, remember, Abdul Rahman fled, and he fled all the way to North Africa. We'll start the Umayyad dynasty class, inshallah, don't worry. That's also in 2 weeks, inshallah. We'll start that on Tuesday. We're going to start the Umayyad class soon. The Abdul Malik fled, Abdul Rahman, fled to North Africa, and eventually he became a separate Khalifa. And he revived the Umayyad, not him but his descendants, revived the Umayyad dynasty in Qurtuba. So in Qurtuba, there was the Umayyad dynasty part 2, and they ruled for 300 years. So generations and generations of Marwan's children remained the Khulafa. And the last of them was Hisham ibn Muhammad, who died 422 Hijrah, that's 1031 CE. 422. So for around 400 years, Marwan and his descendants were in power. Now that doesn't mean anything from an Islamic point of view, meaning it doesn't mean he was a good or bad man. Nonetheless, I mean, when you have somebody like this, you should be a little bit more cautious, be a little bit more discerning. Was he really the type of person to kind of cause this fitna? And as we said, it doesn't really make sense. And then the last point, that for many people, including myself, it doesn't make sense that Marwan is guilty, that given the fact that he seems to have been an excellent secretary and prime minister, and then even he was the secretary under Muawiyah, and then he was a governor under Muawiyah, and then he becomes the Khalifa. He has a stellar track record. There's really, as a leader, he seems to have done an amazing job. Given this stellar resume, it doesn't make sense that if he were to have written this letter, firstly, it's against his character, because the secretary or the katib does not act without getting permission, especially in this sensitive matter, right? And secondly, even if he did it, what is the manly thing to do now that the letter has been discovered? Confess to whom? Uthman. And he knows Uthman is not going to execute him. This is his cousin. And he can explain himself that he did it out of love for Uthman. And very easily, Uthman could have basically demoted him, fired him, disciplined him without any physical, because this is his cousin at the end of the day. And the rebel rousers would have been satisfied. You know what, it wasn't Uthman, this was a misjudgment call, we understand, he's been sacked, and things would have gone. But to see his cousin surrounded, to see the situation get from bad to worse, to see his cousin assassinated, and Marwan just sits there twiddling his fingers, it doesn't make any sense. It's not even what an average courageous man would have done. To claim this of Marwan, who has a stellar resume, really does not make any sense whatsoever. Okay? So Marwan does not really have the motive, and as well, it's not in his character, from what we can see of his character. So then that leaves only one option. And this option, frankly, makes the most sense. It is the option that, as they say, whenever a crime occurs, the first question you ask is, who benefits? Careful. Who benefits? Who benefits, right? Motive. Whoever benefits, the finger points there. And who benefited from all of this? These very rebels. These very people have benefited. And so the third theory is that it was this group, or perhaps a secret cabal amongst this group, that wanted the rest of them to be riled up even more. And so they did what is now called a false flag operation. Those of you that are following these types of things, right? They did basically a tactic to rile up the very people that had planned to go home. And this actually makes the most sense, even though this view is not, as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, it's not found in medieval Islam. Or at least I haven't come across it. Maybe there are some books, and I'm not an expert in history by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not the mainstream view that these people themselves fabricated it. But it is found in our times by a number of authorities who are now critically rethinking through the history. And in particular, a teacher of mine from the University of Medina, his name is Dr. Ghabban, who coincidentally was also my seerah teacher as well, and his specialty was the seerah. And his PhD that he did 25 years ago, his PhD was entitled "The Fitna of the Assassination of Uthman, a critical study of all of the historical reports." And it's a massive 2-volume book, and my entire lecture is based out of that. I have a copy of his PhD. My entire lecture is really based out of that book. And it is the most exhaustive study ever done of the historical narrations of the assassination of Uthman, and he goes over hundreds, literally hundreds of narrations, and he pronounces verdicts on every isnad, and he compiles the story. So it's truly, and this PhD, that's what you do in your PhD, you go out of your way and you do all of this stuff. So alhamdulillah, that dissertation is of immense value, and I'm basing my talk today and next week inshallah out of that. And he defends this view, and a few other modern authors. And he defends this view. And he mentions a number of points. The most important really is the details of the story just don't add up in any other scenario. It's just bizarre. Why did this messenger all of a sudden appear to them and not to anybody else? And why on their path, which isn't even in Medina? They're not in Medina, realize this. They're in another city. If Uthman really wanted to send somebody, why is this guy doing, what is this guy doing 150 miles away? Right in front of them, prancing around on his horse, so that he's caught. And when he's caught, immediate confession, I am the Rasul of Uthman. That's not what a person would say if he's genuinely hiding a secret. And the fact that this messenger that they caught seems to have been left alone and not been killed or something, even though they're going to kill Uthman. But the messenger is completely left unharmed. And to find the actual ring of Uthman is very fishy. The ruler never sends the ring. The ruler sends the stamp. To send the actual ring, that's too dangerous. You know, in those days, there was one ring only. And of course, because it's hand carved, there is no forgery. So Uthman lost his ring, obviously, and it's found on this messenger. And remember, Uthman was at their camp for a few days negotiating with them. So the story could have been that they somehow conspired to get that ring. However, and now that they had it, then they themselves forged the letter, and they put the ring with the letter, which is not how you send an official letter. It's not how you send an official letter. The ring never leaves the hand of the Khalifa. But to find it in this letter, and to have this letter in the middle of nowhere discovered by these people, again, the bottom line, and we cannot know for sure, let us be honest here, Allah knows best in the end, but the fact of the matter is that there's really no sense for Marwan to have forged this letter. It goes against his manners that we know, and he doesn't confess and defend his cousin. And what even if Marwan sent it, how did this messenger end up in that encampment, close to that encampment? So the fact that this letter is found by these very people seems to suggest that the letter was indeed fabricated by them. So you can imagine when this letter is discovered, what will be the net impact? All of those feelings of rage that have been basically exacerbated by the march. Remember, there's mob mentality. And you know, all of us go through this, that when something happens bad, then we meet others who sympathize with what's happened to us. Amongst ourselves, we make that bad into worse. Amongst ourselves, we talk and we say, how could you have done this? How could you have done that? And then our anger goes 10 times what it was because of the actual incident, right? So this mob mentality is now taking hold of a group of disgruntled people that are already irritated with Uthman. And they decide to march immediately to Medina, even though they have not as of yet been to Medina. And the entire group, now how many were they? Unfortunately, the books of history do not tell their numbers, but they appear to have been less than 1,000 and more than maybe 300. So between 300 to 1,000. Okay, so they are not that large that the Sahaba cannot collectively fight them. Medina could have defended and Medina could have fought them. It's not as if an army is invading. At the same time, they're not that small that they can be ignored. So most likely on the lower side of the 300, like most likely 300 or so, around that time. But it could be a little bit more than this. And also, because the siege lasted for a long time, as we'll come to, there's no doubt more and more people came from other cities. So the crowd then marched to the house of Uthman radiallahu anh, and when some of the Sahaba heard that the crowd is marching to Uthman, they themselves grew alarmed, and the first person to predict that evil is boding is the keeper of secrets in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman. Hudayfa had a premonition that things are going to get from bad to worse. And when these rebels announced they're heading to Medina, and Hudayfa's in Medina, Hudayfa said they will end up killing him. He predicted this because he knows the hadith, and he sensed that now it's going to begin. Now all of these ahadith that I've been hearing about and the Prophet told me, this is the beginning of the decline. So they said, he said to his students, his group of people, he said that they're going to kill him. And they said that when they expressed their amazement and they were shocked, he said, وَلَكِنْ هُوَ وَاللَّهِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَهُمْ وَاللَّهِ فِي النَّارِ. But wallahi, he will be in Jannah and they will be in Jahannam. So Hudayfa's premonition, of course, turned out to be correct, because of course that is what he derived from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now they marched to Medina, and they marched straight to the house of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an, and they demanded to see him right then and there. When they confronted him outside of his house, he swore by Allah that this is the first he's hearing of this, meaning I have no idea you're telling me this. And he gave his qasam, and he said that you either bring 2 witnesses who saw me write the letter, or else my qasam should do the job. Now what's he referring to? There's a hadith, all of you should be aware of this. This is a simple rule of Islam. Simple rule of Islam. Our Prophet ﷺ said, Al-bayyinatu ala al-mudda'i wal-yaminu ala man ankar. This is the simple rule of Islam. This is a hadith. Al-bayyina ala al-mudda'i. The plaintiff has to bring the evidence. وَالْيَمِينَ عَلَى مَنْ أَنْكَرَ. And the defendant has to swear by Allah that he's innocent. And that's it. You don't have to, and this is of course even to this day, innocence is presumed. Guilt has to be proven. And this is from the hadith, by the way. And this is a hadith, the famous hadith that deals with disputes in Islam. This is the cornerstone. Al-bayyina ala al-mudda'i. The one who makes the da'wah has to bring the bayan. He has to prove. What is the proof in Islamic law? Primarily, 2 witnesses who have seen the deed. Unless it's zina, 4 witnesses. Otherwise, 2 witnesses who have seen or heard it. And if they don't have the proof, the defendant, all he has to do is yameen. And yameen is qasam. وَالْيَمِينُ عَلَى مَنْ أَنْكَرَ. Yameen is qasam. And qasam is to give a solemn oath. I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I am free of this charge. Okay, this is the qasam, in Arabic called yameen as well. So Uthman gave the qasam, gave the yameen, And he said, do you have any evidence to the contrary? And of course they didn't have the two witnesses, right? They didn't have anything. And so he gave the qasam. He said, I am free of this. I have never heard of this letter. I have no. And he said, how many letters are, like anybody would say when their name is put up, that this is people forge things. This is not me whatsoever. So the crowd did not know what to do. They just camped outside of his house in protest. And more people continued to come from the outlying regions. Now, Uthman's house was a one-story house that was located east of the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. So east is basically between the masjid and Baqi'. That's east. Okay? So it's between the masjid and Baqi'. So we don't know exactly where, but if you exit the Baqi' door of the masjid and you're facing the Baqi' cemetery, you keep on walking somewhere in that region, most likely where the plaza is in our times. Most likely somewhere in that massive plaza region, closer to the masjid and not closer to the graveyard. Because remember, Uthman is from the Sabiqun al-Awwalun, and Uthman's house goes back to the beginnings of Medina. And Uthman is a wealthy person, so he's expanded multiple times. So Uthman has a house. In fact, the riwayat call it al-Qasr. Al-Qasr is we translate it as palace, but don't think of a palace. It means a large house. There is no chandeliers or no fancy wall. No, it's a simple house, but it's a large house, right? It's called Al-Qasr of Uthman. It was towards the eastern side, as we said. Now, by the way, it might even have been in the masjid that is now part of the King Fahd Masjid. We don't know exactly where, but it's between the Baqi' door and the Baqi' cemetery. Either in the masjid or outside the masjid, but closer to the Prophet ﷺ side, the grave, than to the Baqi' side. Is that clear? Right? Exactly, in that region, on that side. Okay? So when you walk outside and you are in that area, somewhere over there most likely. If not somewhere over there, towards the left inside the masjid. Today's masjid. Obviously back then it is not. And we also know that there was one room in particular that was like a saloon, like a large room where he is the Khalifa. He needs to have majalis and gatherings. Lots of people could gather. We know this because at one point in time the protesters broke in and they were in the hundreds in one room. Or not hundreds, but the room was packed. So we have dozens or whatever people. So he has one large room. There were, of course, inner chambers. Now, how do we know all of this, by the way? By reconstructing bits and pieces of what happened, we get an idea. There were inner chambers where, of course, are the bedrooms and the private chambers, and the women of the household, and in particular, the wife of Uthman, Na'ila at the time, that can listen in. And we know this because Na'ila attempted to defend Uthman from the curtains. We'll talk about that next week. And she tried to jump out and protect him, and her fingers were cut off. We'll talk about that. So there's a curtain at the back of the saloon where after this you can see the bedrooms and whatnot. As well, we know from the reports that there were multiple windows, and perhaps what appears to be the case, perhaps either the house was a little bit raised itself or the windows were raised such that you could see down onto the streets, and one window you could actually see the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and if you spoke loud enough you could address the masjid. We know this because Uthman radiallahu anh, when he was towards the end completely barred from exiting, he could actually speak to the people in the masjid. Okay, so that means that his house wasn't on the Baqi' graveyard side. It was more on the side of the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we know there was one window where he could see the protesters, and he had a number of dialogues with them from that window. And we also know that there was a window that faced the haram, the masjid, the Nabawi, and he could have dialogue with them. We also know that, like the houses of that time, and some of you grew up in such houses to this day, the house was connected to at least one more house. And when the house is connected, what does that mean? There's access from the roof. Surely your childhood was like that? Exactly. Jumping over, exactly. We know this because some of the Sahaba, they managed to visit Uthman when he is surrounded by this tactic. By jumping over and coming from the top to come and visit Uthman. So we know therefore that there was an access that was not direct, and the people surrounding the house were not aware of it. And that access was involving the roof of a neighboring house. So either it was connected, or some say that it was enough distance that they could either put a plank or jump and then get to the house of Uthman. That's very common in many cultures and societies to have that type of house. So this is the house of Uthman radiallahu an, and the protesters basically did not know what to do. They surrounded the house, and it got progressively worse. In the beginning, they're simply shouting and protesting, and Uthman radiallahu an does not feel any physical safety, danger, and he can go to the masjid and come back. So in the beginning, he's actually leading the salah and coming back. Slowly but surely, as the tension rises, then things get from bad to worse, and we're going to talk about the details next week. And eventually, they even stop visitors, and they even stop food and water from coming in. Like, that's towards the end. How long did the siege last? A number of reports tell us that it was around 40 plus days, more than a month. More than a month, 40 plus days. And just like with many incidents of the seerah, but this is not even in the seerah, it's much later on, we don't have a detailed day by day, what happened day one, what happened day two. And when later people report, they don't tell us what day it happened. So we have to go back and attempt to reconstruct with our guesstimates of how to do that, which is what, alhamdulillah, my Shaykh has done. So I'm not going to take any credit for that. That is his reconstruction, which he has spent 5 years trying to figure out. So alhamdulillah, we can just take his research and utilize it for our series of lectures. Now, and again, the details inshallah will be next Wednesday, but very briefly so that we understand what's going on. So their demand was very simple. Their demand was very simple. They said, we will not accept anything less than resignation. That's it. No, forget all the conditions. Now, this clearly shows who's winning here in terms of who is the motive. The motive is clearly from these people now. This one incident caused them to reject the whole treaty. And they said, you have betrayed, you have done khiyana, and you, Uthman, must resign. There is no alternative. No demands for anything else. No negotiation. You resign, or else ... At this stage, it's ... Within a week, that ... would be filled with threats. Within 2-3 weeks, death. And within 40 days, he will be killed. Okay, so this is in a nutshell. Now, as the street protests became more and more prolonged, in fact, it appears that more people joined the protesters, and in fact, even from other cities, they began to now camp outside, and it's almost like a free-for-all now, that now we have reached the qasr of Uthman, and so people that have grievances from other provinces, they know this is happening, and whoever can come within that time period, they are now surrounding the house of Uthman ibn Affan. Now again, as I said, we don't have a day-by-day play, but we do know some things that happen, and we can try to assume when did some of these things happen. So one of the things that we know about is that he called a council of senior Sahaba in his house. The fact that it's in his house means it's towards the beginning and not towards the end, because towards the end he was denied any visitors. And he asked them, what should he do? He asked them, what is your position? What should I do? The majority of them said, you cannot resign. And some of them thought it was in the best interest of the ummah that he resigns, given the fact that these people are so aggressive. Now, by the way, realize this is the time of Abu Bakr and Umar. I mean, they've never seen anything like this. Just imagine, this is the first time there are tensions that are so blatant between the Muslims. The first time that there seems to be some problems that are so public. And some of the Sahaba, they felt, okay, just give up to them, khalas, take it off and just, resign, so that you get rid of these rabble-rousers. And as this meeting is going on, Ibn Umar walks in, radiallahu an. And Ibn Umar, of course, when we mention him in the seerah, he's always a young kid, young boy, he's a teenager. But that's in the seerah. Now Ibn Umar is of the senior because his father was the Khalifa. And now he himself is slightly younger than Ali ibn Abi Talib. He's not the teenager of the seerah anymore now. This is Ibn Umar, whose father was the previous Khalifa. This is Ibn Umar who was in charge of the Shura. This is Ibn Umar who goes back and has fought at Uhud and wanted to, all of this resume is there for Ibn Umar. And Ibn Umar walks in. And Uthman says, "Oh Ibn Umar, you tell me, what should I do? You tell me, what is your advice?" And Ibn Umar said, "If you were to give up your Khilafah, would you live forever in this dunya?" Uthman said, "No." He said, "And if you were not to give it up and they attacked, could they do anything more than to kill you?" He said, "No, what can they do more than this?" He said, "Do they control your Jannah and Nar?" He said, "No." So then he said, in that case, and of course he knows the answer, what he is saying is, what's going to happen if you resign? Will you live forever in this dunya? And if you don't resign and they kill you, wouldn't you die anyway? That's what he's trying to say. Like, what are you going to gain? They don't control your Jannah and Nar, Allah does. So Ibn Umar said, in that case, I do not think that you should take off a shirt that Allah has placed on you. Otherwise, now listen to this. This is what you call hikmah. Otherwise, you will set the precedent. And any time somebody wants to complain against the Khalifa, they'll come and do this, and then chaos will reign. This understood, Ibn Umar understood the problems of caving into their demands. These people are not worthy to criticize Uthman. And if Uthman were to resign, then any time somebody has a complaint, that's the way they're going to do it. And that's emotional blackmail, threats. That's not the way you can run any type of system. And so he suggested to Uthman radiallahu anhu to not resign. And of course, by the way, this was exactly, we mentioned this 3 weeks ago, authentic ahadith narrated in Sahih Muslim, narrated in Tirmidhi, narrated in Muslim Imam Ahmad, many ahadith. Our Prophet ﷺ said, "O Uthman, it is possible Allah will put a shirt on you." And Ibn Umar is using the same language, and this has led many scholars of hadith to say Ibn Umar was referencing the hadith to Uthman, because they both know the hadith. It is possible that Allah will, this is the hadith, Allah will place a shirt on you that others will try to strip off of you. And when they try to do it, then do not give them your shirt. So this is an authentic hadith, multiple actually, in which the Prophet ﷺ is saying explicitly, don't give up. You have to remain firm. And therefore, Uthman ibn Affan understood this, and to the end he refused to resign. But he also refused to defend himself, because now you have these rabble-rousers, we'll talk about this next week, but just to jump the gun, everybody doesn't, a lot of people don't understand why didn't they just get rid of these people? Why didn't they just send in the rest of the Sahaba and do that? Realize, never has another Muslim been killed up by another Muslim right now. Never has there been, as Uthman said, unsheathing of the sword between two Muslims. And Uthman said, I will not allow this to happen in my Khilafah. I will shed my blood before the blood of any other Muslim is shed in my watch. And that's what ended up happening. And we'll talk about this next Wednesday, but multiple times the Sahaba insisted. And at times he even rebuked them, by the authority Allah has given me, go back home and don't do anything. What are you going to do when the Khalifa is telling you this? What are you going to do when Uthman is saying, by Allah's authority that I have over you, get back to your house and don't hurt the people outside? This was the philosophy and the akhlaq of Uthman, that he did not want, because he knew these are people you're going to have to fight them with swords to get rid of. These aren't people you ask them and you push them away. You're going to have to fight an actual fight, a battle. And that's not going to result except in some deaths. And he goes, not under my watch will the ummah break up into different groups killing each other. And it is also narrated at one of these times, at one of these times that he heard the people threatening to kill him. This would have been probably the first week. So initially there's no threat of physical violence. Within the first week or so, the people outside are saying, if you don't resign, لَنَقْتُلَنَّكَ, we're going to kill you. And Uthman ibn Affan was a shy, modest person, we know this, and he comes back and his face is pale inside of his house. And there are Sahaba and there's family there, and they said, what is the matter? And he said, I have heard them threatening to kill me. But what is their justification for shedding my blood? How could they kill another Muslim? For by Allah, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, and this hadith is one of the most famous hadith of Uthman reported in Bukhari and Muslim. And it was said on the occasion of his house being surrounded. And this hadith is one of the most basic hadith of fiqh that every student of knowledge memorizes. And Uthman narrates it when his house is surrounded by these people, and that's why it becomes even more interesting and important for us. He said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ said that لا يحل دم امرئ مسلم إلا بإحدى ثلاث. The life of a Muslim is never allowed to take except in one of three reasons. This is the famous hadith that is used by Islamic judges, by the books of fiqh, that when is the death penalty allowed in our books of fiqh. So the Prophet said it is not allowed for a Muslim's life to be taken except for one of three reasons. النفس بالنفس, the soul for a soul, and the one who does adultery, and the one who مفارق للجماعة, he leaves the religion and he breaks away from the jama'ah. And he goes, I have not done any of these things, that I have never shed the blood of any Muslim. And he has, of course, in terms of Uthman's haya, he says a very powerful phrase, that the hadith says, whoever does adultery, and he goes, Wallahi, I have not even touched my own private part with my right hand ever since I touched the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. Forget adultery, I haven't even touched myself. Do you think I'm going to go touch another woman? This is his haya that he's saying. How could you accuse me of doing this? And then he goes, I'm not breaking from the jama'ah. I am the one who is leading the jama'ah. So he goes, on what basis will they kill me? I have not done any of these three things. So the details go on, and the time is up, subhanAllah. But inshallah, next Wednesday, inshallah ta'ala, we will discuss, I know it's a very tense moment now about the details, but I want to leave that for inshallah next week. Now, when did the situation get from bad to worse, and what were the demands of the people around? And then eventually, how did they storm the house, and also the defense. One of the most interesting stories also is how Ali radiallahu an attempted to defend Uthman, and in fact how he even sent Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhum as guards, armed with armor. And this is so clear that the other narrative that they have is completely bogus. He is sending his own sons to protect Uthman ibn Affan. And when they arrived, I'm jumping the gun, I know I'm going to say this again next week, but when they arrived and they were armed, Uthman in essence begins yelling at them. How dare you bring weapons? Go back home. Anshudukum billah. I demand you in the name of Allah, you go back and take your armor off. This was the last day when the situation is just going to burst. And Ali radiallahu anh sends his own sons to protect him, and he sees the swords, he sees the battle, goes, not on my watch. You're going to go back. What are you going to do? What are you going to do now when he's telling you in the name of Allah to go back? So the point is that the narrative that they have, that Hassan, Hussein, Ali, Uthman, it's just completely false, and even they have difficulty reconciling this aspect with their narrative. And they have their bizarre theories, which we're not going to necessarily get into. But again, a very sad tragedy. And we conclude by one statement of Uthman, that at one point in the siege, he told the people, and he attempted to negotiate with them many times. He told them, do you not realize that if you shed my blood, the ummah will never be united after this? Like he's warning them, do you not realize you are going to bring about the firqa to the end of the judgment day? We're never going to have one jama'ah once you have opened the sword between Muslims. And he attempted, but as we know, وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ قَدَرًا مَقْدُورًا, that Uthman became the first, if you like, martyr amongst the Khulafa, who was taken by Muslims. And from that point until our time, we have never had the type of unity that we enjoyed in the first part of Islam. Inshallah, there's no point for questions now, because next week when we finish it all, then inshallah we'll have the questions. So just some announcements, inshallah. Firstly, so next week will be a class, and then I'll be gone 2 weeks from now. So we'll take a week break, and then when we come back, inshallah, we'll do the ahadith of Uthman ibn Affan. So next week, inshallah, we'll finish the assassination, then take a break, and then we'll do the ahadith of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu.